There we go. All right. Good day, everyone. It is October 3rd, 10 a.m. here in Mountain View. My name is Jonathan Chan. We are launching a 1st of October GCP Online Meetup. I have my special guests here with us today, Anthony and Nima. How are you guys doing?
Hello.
Doing good. It's good to have you back.
I know. I'm excited to be back, especially with all the online meetup members. Hey, so before I forget, I think one thing I keep forgetting to ask is if this is your second time or third time watching these online meetups, click on subscribe on below and get notifications whenever we launch online meetups. I think we might start doing kind of off the cuff online meetups, and I think you'll get some interesting stories from us. So if you subscribe, you'll see when we start online meetups without official announcements. If this is your first time, or if you don't like online meetups, subscribe anyway and tell us exactly why you don't like these online meetups. We're always looking for feedback, obviously, and we just want to hear from you. So the goal of this is really to listen to you and hear from our customers and our users about what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong. And anything else to add, Anthony?
No, I mean, again, we're just trying to build a community around this. And I think that, we've been doing this for almost coming up on a year, right?
Yeah.
And so we really just, again, hearing from all of you who participate and watch these is really important to us. So
exactly. Exactly. So today we are talking about, what are we talking about today? Building single page applications with GCP and Firebase. And I was just talking to Nima before this and how kind of single page applications have grown in popularity, and just how important it is for single page applications to perform well, because sometimes this is like the only app that a customer or a company has. So finding the right platform and finding the right environment to build these single page apps is obviously very important. And Nima, obviously with a lot of experience and expertise in this space, is going to talk about how to build that with GCP and Firebase.
Yes, I guess the bit of a history of a single page application goes back a few years. I mean, if you think about it, some of its first elements were Ajax, right? And Gmail itself, when it came about in early 2000s, for example, having a page that you interact with, and it doesn't, not every click, not every link, reloads the whole page, kind of feels like a more native application. That's where it really came from. And nowadays, as you know, with the web development, it kind of has a quite a quick pace, and there's a lot of evolution. And the last few years, I'm sure many of you have seen the new front-end frameworks like React and Angular, and my personal favorite, Vue.js. And that has pushed it more. And also the rise of software as a service, SaaS application, that's become a huge offering in terms of startup world and others. Having a web-based application that very much feels native, as if you have a native application on your phone, for example. And in order to emulate that with something that, again, not every page reloads and it just acts that way, that has pushed the popularity of single-page applications high quite a bit.
Right. And it provides a more seamless, I think, user experience, right? So I think that's also another, it's grown in popularity because when people go to a website on their phones now, they don't want to be clicking through different pages and clicking through a lot of links, and just having that single interface to kind of navigate through the app makes the experience a lot smoother.
Yeah. One of the cool things I'm excited to see is just kind of the serverless aspect to it. So typically you have this divide between, let's say, front end and back end, and typically they have to be on the same cadence to, front end needs to develop components that interact with certain back end services. But now with functions, and I think we'll dive into that a little bit, that's not necessarily the case, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just getting easier and easier in general to develop, your hopefully $1 billion idea, if you will.
You got $1 billion? I don't got $1 billion idea.
I got $100 idea.
And maybe we'll do another meetup
$1 billion
podcast on that specific.
There you go. So before you get started, I think Alex has a question about Cloud Functions as the REST backend for SPA. We don't have to go into it right now, but just something to keep in mind as we go through the demo on Firebase and GCP.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I think Nima will be covering that.
Yes, kind of Cloud Functions. Yeah. So Alex, yep, we'll be talking about that. Thanks for the question.
Cool. Awesome. So, just also another quick shout out here is we also are on Twitter, so you can find our social media handles here. So if you want to hear from Nima, Jonathan, or myself, there are our Twitter handles, and we also have, I think, just at GCP Online Meetup. We have not been using that to date, but now that I've put it out there into the ether, I'm sure we will begin frequently updating that just with some cool news and cool things that we here at GCP Online Meetup care about. Right, Cham?
Yeah. I have about 10 followers, so more the merrier.
Well, we got more viewers on this video
than followers, yeah. There you go.
Awesome.
Cool. So I guess we can move on to, so we talked to this, I guess, a little bit. But yeah, I think most people here probably are in one way or another familiar with the idea of single page applications. And simply it comes from the name that it does look and serve as a single page. So when you're developing these applications, you're not developing, many pages. You're developing kind of dynamic components that gets loaded and unloaded on the same page, and pretty much no interaction with the page will actually try to do a reload and getting all the information and loading the page all over again from the server. So the only thing that really is communicated to any backend, any kind of server, assuming you have one, usually you will, would be just your data, usually in the form of JSON or however else connections to your databases and triggering your cloud functions and so on and so forth. Now, one of the very cool things from a development perspective, we talked about the different advantages of single-page applications for a user from a user experience perspective, but there are also a couple of really cool advantages from the development perspective, and that's deployment, for example, being a very easy one. You basically, pretty much any of the frameworks that I talked about, for example, if you use to build a single-page application, when you build and get it ready for deployment, you have about 3 files, right? You have your index.html file, you have your package JavaScript, and you have your package CSS. And those 3 files you can static host anywhere. And by that I mean you can drop it in anywhere that would simply just serve statically, and treat it like a static page in terms of it's simply just CSS and JavaScript. So in this case, some of the options are basically any cloud vendor, with a bucket. For example, Google Cloud Storage. You can use App Engine as well if you want to use that and take advantage of everything that App Engine brings in terms of a pass and no ops pass. Or you can use Firebase, which also provides Firebase hosting, which again is just static hosting. You can throw it up there, and that's all it takes for deployment. And then you can do it very easily. You can add different versions of your app, and all you do is just change the versioning, and you can literally drag and drop, for example, in Google Cloud Storage or any bucket, and it'll start serving. And that's, of course, talking about all of this is the front end portion of the single page application. If you have a backend, then you can build that in any way you want. You can use REST API. It doesn't matter how you connect to your backend, but for example, here we'll see the example here we see. You'll use REST API to connect to the backend Firebase. Or sorry, in this demo, actually, we use the Firebase library, but the library is basically just a wrapper for the REST API that you can use directly should you want to. And for Google Cloud specifically, you also get, if you use any of these 3 approaches to deploying your single page application, Firebase, App Engine, or Google Cloud Storage, you also, for free, you basically get everything that comes with having something serve on those front ends. So you get your load balancer, you get your CDN, and all the security that comes with hosting on those networks. So it makes it really easy to simply build your SPA and just drop it on one of these servers, and you'll be up and running basically. So this is just a quick overview, and then we'll jump into the code. And basically, from a Google Cloud perspective, and I guess most cloud providers, you can see that you start everything from infrastructure and then to more managed services. And one thing we're going to do with our single page application today is taking advantage of cloud functions instead of building a whole backend. As most of you probably know, there's just, as the name says, they're functions, and they get triggered to do specific tasks for your app. So we'll show how that works.
So before we get into the technology, Nima, can you talk about kind of what are good use? So I'm chatting with some folks on the chat line about multi-cloud SPAs versus multi-page SPAs, and I think there's a good use case for SPAs. In your opinion, what would make a good use case for SPA, and what would not make a good use case for single-page applications?
Sure. So single-page applications, basically, very good use cases are, again, when you want to provide you want to use web technology, have a web page, but you want it to act and feel very much like a native desktop or native application on your phone. So the good use cases is providing a really kind of native user experience, and also you want to have an easy time in terms of deployment. How you want to maintain it. Also, if data and connectivity is a concern. For example, in a single page application, as we mentioned earlier, once you load the page, then any action you take, the only connectivity with the backend server is now just data. You no longer have to try and reload anything else outside of your data needs through that page, because it's now sitting on the client side. And all these components, single page application frameworks basically put and load a template rendering engine, on your client side and on the front end. So that basically takes over a lot of functionalities that servers used to do, and required connectivity constantly back and forth between the servers.
Yeah. So pretty much like kind of one of the huge benefits is being able to get up, and I think we're seeing this in the chat, but get up and running pretty quickly as far as being able to iterate and have something running in production with a front end and some type of dynamic backend. Without having to kind of manage at an infrastructure level. One of the things that's interesting about it too is that I'm seeing just from working with customers is that there's a lot of frameworks that are being developed to extend that kind of toolkit that, let's say, sure, the simple way to do it is deploy a single page app and then use functions to trigger some type of maybe fetching data or something like that. But I think that the ecosystem is starting to expand as far as things like managing credentials and I think one of them is called serverless. But
yeah, and you see this practice. Most of the modern day, for example, software as a service, whichever pick your favorite, that you see that they take advantage of this quite often, right? These are quite often web based, and they basically very much look and act like your native desktop application, if you will. And now, having said that, of course, not all the cases you want to always go around and use single page applications. One of the reasons for that is, as I mentioned, not everything is loaded, and since it acts as a single page, if you actually look at the source code, and we'll demo this later, you look at the source code of a single page application, you're going to see a few lines of code, and all it does, it loads the what's called the build.js, basically your build file that has all the JavaScript that is defines all the logic for the app, and this becomes a bit problematic for search engines, for example, because the search engine doesn't have direct access to everything that's in your web page. And that can have an adverse effect on your search engine optimization. So SEO is more trickier. You have to be more careful when you're building an SPA, which obviously SEO will matter for you. So now, having said that, the search engines are getting a lot better at basically traversing Ajax in general and being able to pick up everything that's happening. But in the meantime, there's also things you can do with a single page application to combat that and make sure your SEO rating is favorable, and that part of that is the concept called SSR, or server-side rendering of SPAs, and that's basically you pre-render potential HTML pages, potential pages that usually dynamically gets loaded by your SPA template engine, and you pre-render those, and then you load those to the front end, and the search engine will have a much easier time kind of going and crawling the preloaded pages rather than waiting for the SPA to actually generate those dynamically. So there are some things to keep in mind, but again, search engines are getting much better at this, and you won't need to worry about this, in the near future. So the downsides of building SPAs as a very much a native user experience becomes less and less, I would say.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Nima. I never thought about. I mean, that's more of a business decision, right? Like, without search engines, that's not really a big deal. But obviously, everyone's interested in getting their page, ranked higher, and because we're not generating content.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, if you're building an awesome SPA, you want you're building it for a purpose that you would like to look at it as a business and so something, and you want your brand to be recognized, and your your functionality to be reachable. Yes.
Good. All right.
So yeah, so here are some of the. So I guess actually we'll come back to this, but I'm gonna jump right into code. So here's an example of a single page application. I put together a very super simple one page that basically uses Vue.js in this case, but again, you can use any of your favorite frameworks you like. And what it does is it just goes, let me showcase the app for you. I guess I should have.
So the stack you're demoing consists of Firebase, Google Cloud Functions, and is that it?
Yeah. So Vue, well, for framework, it uses Vue.js, and then basically, yeah, you just using functions, and which you can define, and we'll talk a little bit about that. In this case, Cloud Functions, Google Cloud Functions, and Firebase Functions, you use Node.js and JavaScript, or JavaScript. And on the back end, that JavaScript is being run using Node.js and Express specifically for those who are familiar. And we just launched that. So basically, this is our very simple
nice
SPA. Let's say, imagine this is a much more elaborate, and you basically have an actual online, soccer game, let's say.
Football.
Yes, football more specifically.
For our global users, or global viewers.
for non-North American fellow audience. And let's say, your back end, basically you play the game, and you have, different players that score, and as it's scoring, then you have the scoreboard on the side, right? And this is an example, for example, of a super basic SPA, right? So you have different components, and these are all being loaded, using the database, and we can show the database here. For example, these are the 4 players that you're seeing, but this is the real-time database of Firebase that's driving this on the back end, and basically the top score is being calculated every time somebody scores. So let's say you have this, right, and it works fine, and it's using the database, and you want to kind of now add some dynamic functionality to it, right? So there's lots of things. Most of the functionality that happens on an SPA is on the front end, but obviously, if you have a back end, if you have a database, a lot of stuff for your app will happen that you don't want to be calculated or run on any single client. So this is where you realize that, oh, besides my database as a backend, I also need some functionality, some logic to do things on the backend, right? Whether it's you want to run promotions and notify your users, whether you want to do some calculations on the backend for finding who the top scorer is, anything like that, and many other use cases. It's something that now you want to again perform on the backend. So in this case, for example, let's say the players are playing and the season has ended, and you hit the end of season, and ideally you want the winner of the players to receive an email. So if this thing actually worked properly, here we have. So is it?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
So for example, you can see that when I ended the season, who did we have as the player 4?
Player 4.
And let's see. Yeah, so we have congrats player 4, you're the season's top scorer. So now how does this work? And right, I kept it as simple as possible, but basically everything was SPA, and then when you hit end season, there's actually a cloud function that's being launched and looking at who the top scorer was, and then sending an email, looking up the email, for example, the info that we have here. In this case, this is this is the email that I've been using. And it sends them an email and then says, congratulations. So if we go back to, I guess we can show a little bit first of the architecture here. So this is, in this case, we have a Firebase, and on the backend, simply the cloud function is sitting there. And just like you're making use and contacting the database in order to get the info, you can also trigger functions either directly by simply calling it an endpoint, an HTTPS endpoint that the cloud function is listening on, and that's your express that I mentioned earlier is doing its job. Or it can be part of triggers that we have listed here, for example, for Firebase specifically, that can fire it off. For example, in this case, when I hit the end season, it actually just writes a new tag, a timestamp tag on end of season timeline. And that updates a specific, I can show here, specifically this season ended timestamp here. And when that changes, I have defined in the code. Now, if we go and open up our function here, and this is the email season's top score, you can see that the function, it works, the trigger works on the function database reference that endpoint, season ended. And that's what you see here, season ended. So basically, anytime this is changing, right, it's triggering this cloud function. And this cloud function, what it does is, it's basically, again, finds who the top scorer is, and then looks up their email address, and then sends them a little message, right? So that's one of the triggers. But there's other ones, right? Anytime you can have something triggered every time in your SPA app, somebody uploads an image, for example, right? So let's say you have a photo sharing app that you've built, and you want every time somebody uploads it, you want a couple of things happen. You want the friends on the friend list of that user to be notified. So there's a cloud function for you to go and look up all the friends, whoever is, for example, is following this user, and send the notification. And that's what that cloud function does. And then there could be another trigger, and that is to, hey, we just got an image. Let's go take that image, process it, compress it. Let's create a thumbnail out of it, and now put the thumbnail up. And you can see that's another backend functionality that obviously it's not something that's going to happen or you want to happen on the front end. So that would be another cloud function. So there's two cloud functions right there. That one is to notify your friends that you uploaded a photo of yourself, and also create a thumbnail and store, the image that was uploaded, or do any kind of image compression, things like that. So, you can see that it's very easy to see where the backend comes into place. And you don't want to build a backend; you just want to define the functions, and then that's where your cloud function comes in.
Nima, can you talk about a little about there's some echo, but can you talk a little bit about the magic behind the Firebase, the real-time database? So you notice that when you click on a score button, it automatically updates the interface.
Yes.
Like the score. Is that Firebase doing all the real-time notifications, the updating, or is it something else?
Absolutely. No, it is Firebase. And in this case, so for that, if you using Firebase with one of the clients, basically what it does, it's installing in the backend of Firebase, is installing listeners, right? So it installs listeners, and when something changes, automatically notifies the backend database, and also anybody else, so any other clients that are connected to that database. So that's generally the advantage of the real-time part of the Firebase real-time, is that it keeps a live sync between all the clients, and when one changes, one updates, it gets propagated through the whole system, and it uses WebSockets for that, actually. And you can see how this happens. So for example, player 1, you can see the goals is 1, and if I go and do score here, you can, on the left side, you can see how it's being updated in the actual database view that we have. And when this change happens, then is also propagated through anybody else or any other client, whether it's mobile, version of your app, or whether it's another web-based version. All the clients that you have connected to the same database and the same path on the database will see that change propagated through.
Yeah. Wow, so that's really useful, especially for, I would think, like chatting apps or gaming apps where everyone kind of needs to be aligned in terms of whatever the score or the data. Everyone wants to share the same data.
If in our audience, anybody who's been building apps, whether native or web, you know that it's quite a bit of work to set up these listeners, if you will, like these event handlers, that when these changes happen, and these basically just come for free with the real-time database on Firebase. So just to show, now this was one that was triggered as part of functionality, but you can also have cloud functions that simply you can define, and you can use them as an endpoint, and you can treat them as a REST API that you just call. So for example, here we have another cloud function, and this one is just a hello one. And let me see if I can. And basically, when you deploy this, and we'll go through it in a section, you can also see, let's see, what was the second function call here? Yeah, so we can see that when it was deployed, we also got a URL for the endpoint that is simply just defined as an endpoint. And you can always call that and hit that from anywhere you want. Oh. Actually, I'm not going to go through that. So you can hit that endpoint, and that endpoint basically will output or do whatever you want it to. So in addition to the functionality that for cloud functions that you can build in to your app, you can also define them simply as HTTPS and nodes that you can trigger as well. That's something that you could be triggering directly from either from within the app or from anywhere else. You can set up a cron job, for example, to just hit that whenever you want. Let's say the top scorer, too many players, this awesome secret sauce soccer app becomes very popular, and then you don't want it every time that somebody is, for example, hitting score for the calculation for the top score to be triggered. And you can see that can easily become a point that actually can be exploited. Let's see how fast I can keep triggering this function. So you say, okay, why don't we just trigger the scorecard calculation every 10 seconds? So that becomes a more regular kind of job, like a cron job. So you can set up a cron job, and you can just hit that endpoint separate from what's happening on the front end in order to do that calculation, and then have the top, the scoreboard be updated based on the threshold and the frequency that you define, separated and from the front end user activity directly. Yeah, so a few other things that you can do. The server-side rendering that I mentioned, that's another thing that you can kind of build into your SPA in order to improve your SEO. But basically, as a backend, you can completely build quite a bit of backend functionality using the cloud functions without actually having to go ahead and build one. But should you go beyond that, of course, then you can connect again your SPA to anything you want. You can create a whole node backend, and you can have your front end and backend be purely JavaScript if that's what you wanted. What else do we have here?
I think one thing I want to call out is just looking at all these different components. Talk us through kind of deployment time, what that actually looks like, right? If we're looking at functions, real-time database, I think that what we're seeing here is very cool as far as a functionality perspective, but really I think want to uncover how simple it is to kind of get started with these.
Yeah, so as you can see here, I have a folder, right? And you can see the folder structure on the left side. And in there, I have built my SPA. And again, it depends what your framework looks like, but pretty much most of the frameworks you're familiar with, you have your source code. These are all my components, regardless of you using React or Angular or Vue.js or any of the other ones. You know that you have components and you want to load them. And basically what you do a build command depending on the framework you're using. And that build command will create this distribution folder. And again, this is similar across all those frameworks. And in there, you basically have your index HTML, and you have your build.js, and that's where all your code is, right? So when that gets created, then you're ready to deploy. So up to this point, it's specific to the framework and whatever system you use, but then it basically gets minified, and all the code comes into these 2-3 files, and now you're ready to use it, basically deploy it for static hosting. And for that, in the case of Firebase, now I have everything installed here, which takes about 2-3 commands, and we can put those in the notes later. But if you look at the documentation for Firebase, it's extremely easy. You basically set up a project in the console. You install Node, of course, because all this framework uses Node. And then you use the Node package manager, or NPM, to install the Firebase tools. And then at that point, you authenticate with your Firebase project, and you end up where I am right now in order to be able to deploy. So I'm in this folder. I have initiated this folder for a Firebase project. And in there, I simply have my code, my SPA code. And then I also have a folder, as you can see here, my functions, which again is simply an index.js with those 2 functions that we've gone through.
That's awesome.
So all you do is then at that point, you hit Firebase deploy, and it basically goes through, looks at the distribution folder and grabs those 3 files, looks at your functions folder, and grabs and defines that. And you can see some of the messaging here. And it starts deploying. And it deploys this too, because again, since this has been authenticated to a specific Firebase project, obviously it knows where to deploy it. So it deploys the hosting part into the Firebase static hosting, and it looks at the 2 functions and starts preparing those 2 functions to create endpoints and putting those 2 functions in the backend as well. So, and let's see, hold on. And I think a few more seconds, but you can see here now updating function hello world, and also email season's top score.
Awesome.
So, and this one actually, if anybody is curious, for the email process that I just use the Gmail API, which is gives you basic needs initially. I think this does about 500 emails a day you can do with the Gmail API, and that's all I used. Again, minimal path of resistance, and it doesn't cost anything. You don't have to do anything. You just grab it, and it's a few lines, and you can use this to test out sending email notifications for anything you want, for example. And you can see at the end here, so that took about 2 minutes, I guess, to deploy. And now it's there, it's ready. That's the project, that's the hosting, and those are the functions that's there. And if you go back to your console, you can also see this. So this is where the database has been, and then the hosting. You can see 10:32 a.m., so just a minute ago. So that was the deployment that we just did right now. And your functions is the 2 functions that we have defined, and these are the 2 that we have, right? Hello world and email season sub score. And you can see they're different kinds. So this is an HTTP request one that you can just use as an endpoint, but this one actually is linked to your real-time database, and it only triggers when that path has been updated, right? Now, another thing you can do is all these things happening. So for example, if I go and hit end season a couple more times, right? Let's say we get a few more. Now, one thing is, now I'm in Google Cloud Platform console, and this is basically every time you create a project in Firebase console, it creates a Google Cloud Platform project. And so these are the same. You basically have 2 interfaces to the same project. And you can see this because we can have a look here, for example. We can have a look at the logs. Let me go up. And you can see, as I was just hitting, this is the time, the 10:34. So the couple of hits that I did, which resulted in a couple of new emails coming out. You can also in Stackdriver, for example, the main logging system of Google Cloud Function, you can or Google Cloud Platform, you can see that these functions were triggered, and you can see that emails were successfully sent. So you have a lot of debugging power that again comes just out of the box for you from this GCP project that's being also created and generated from creating your Firebase function. To say nothing of all the crash reporting and analytics and everything that you get with Firebase itself. As a mobile backend service, whether it's mobile, whether it's web, you get a lot of things for free. Not only you get the whole authentication, you get the real-time database, you have the storage, you have the hosting, the functions. You also have test labs if you want to do A/B testing. You have your crash reporting. This is, again, you just include the library piece, and then from then on, you just start getting crash reporting for your apps for free. There's performance, notification, and so on and so forth. It's really worth looking at when you want to fully manage backend service for your mobile application or even for your web pages.
That's awesome. So I think that we have another question in the chat. And it looks like Alex is asking a little bit on server-side rendering regarding your last slide, asking if it's specific to Firebase or what Firebase kind of does on the server-side rendering.
Yeah. Yeah, so no, it has actually nothing to do with Firebase at all. So server-side rendering basically generates more components for your single-page application, and you define how you create the server-side rendering in terms of the pre-rendered HTML ones. That is defined depending on the framework that you use, right? So it'll be slightly different in Vue.js, slightly different in React, but it's a SPA concept. It has nothing to do with Firebase as itself. Firebase is basically just hosting what you throw at it in this specific case, is the static hosting. But no, it's a function and feature that you do. So have a look at it, look it up. Just put in whatever your favorite framework, and then in search favorite framework, and then SSR, and then you'll see documentation come up is like how to enable SSR functionality in using the framework that you're using in order to create those pre-rendered HTML ones. That makes it easier for more and more search engines to have an easier time, traversing through all the content of your application.
Nice.
Yeah. Thanks, Nima. And then another question is each function a container? Do they each have a copy of the node modules directory?
The cloud function, are each of them the container? So cloud functions, yes.
It's kind of like a yes. I mean, it probably is. I don't think we actually know. Yeah, I mean.
No, on Google Cloud Platform, yes, they are containers that are actually being spun up that run your cloud function in this case specifically. So and that's what's happening in the back end of Firebase. So they're tiny kind of containers that come up, run that function, and in that container you have Node that's executing. As a runtime, that's executing a JavaScript code, and then there's things like, as I mentioned, Express for any kind of web serving, functionality, and a few other things. But generally, yes. That was sorry. And then there was a second part to the question.
Yeah. Do they each have the node modules directory?
Oh yes. So no, I mean, again, it really doesn't matter how this works on the back end, but no, not every one of those containers in this particular case of GCP and Firebase will actually load that. Then load the module, they share it. They don't load it in every single container, though. So that's how the cloud functions are working.
Yeah. Great questions. Thanks for all those questions. Yeah, I mean, it looks like Firebase is, I have customers using Firebase for many reasons. So one of them is kind of silly. I mean, there's a startup and they just like the HTTPS function, right? But, that's just a small thing. But Firebase seems to encompass many different things to just get you started without having to integrate all these different products and all these different technologies from different places. You can literally just use Firebase for your mobile app and just, kind of create a minimal viable product for, whatever billion-dollar idea you have.
The $1 million ideas are good too. Don't give up on those.
Yeah.
You live in the Bay Area, you understand that joke might hit home a bit more. You don't have to have a $1 billion idea to actually go and build something. Trust me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So we'll stay on for probably another 15, 30 seconds. Any other questions from the chat? Please, go ahead and ask us. There's been some really good interactions and conversations going on. If you like this video, click, thumbs up. If you didn't, You could click thumbs down, but we'll be pretty sad if you do. And don't forget to subscribe again. Like I said, we're going to start trying to launch online meetups without kind of any preparation. Maybe we're at a conference and we want to just talk to our, to the meetup members about some cool things that we're seeing. So if you subscribe to the YouTube channel, then you'll just quickly get notified, and you can, hear more from us. Nima, Anthony, anything else you want to close off with? Oh, hold on. Actually, Matt has one more question.
Sure.
How much temp storage scratch space is available to a function? Ooh,
so that would depend from platform to platform. For Firebase specifically, I know it's in the documentation. I don't remember the numbers, off the top of my head, but you can find the space, the memory space that you have available, which is again part of that container, and at the same time part of the limit that the system puts on your cloud function. But generally, that's your in your in-memory kind of space. But of course, that your cloud function it'll also be able to interact with any storage if you need go beyond just loading what's in the memory to make use of that first space.
Yeah, I think I'll send a link to a pricing page, which I think might have some of that information about the amount of storage you can send. So I'll send that over. But yeah, Nima, you were about to say something?
I was going to say, please provide us, I think you guys covered it, please provide us feedback. Tell us how this session potentially could be much more useful. We can go ahead and improve it, do a 2.0 version, down the road, and incorporate all the things, extra things that you wanted to see, the things that you wanted us to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, any other questions? 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.5, 1. That's what I do to my kids. I just give them that extra, couple seconds, because they never do anything. If I count to 5, they're just waiting until 5, and then I'm like, all right. Well, thank you so much, Anthony, Nima. Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining this meetup. We'll see you next time. Actually, next time we think we're talking about either Spanner or multi-cloud Kubernetes deployment. I'm not 100% sure which one, but stay tuned and hear from us.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. You. Bye.